Record. All right. Welcome to the 2021 virtual congressional debate workshop. My name is Mike Harris. I'm the coach at East High School, and I helped to put together at Astra debate with a really cool team of people this year. And we've been doing a whole bunch of tournament hosting and workshops for students and coaches across the state. And we started. This will be our first year kind of doing this workshop. In the past, the Sunflower District, which Wichita East, where I coach, is a part of, has put on this workshop. And before that, Wichita, I think Sunflower District always put it on. And when I came to East, we kind of took it over. And this year we decided just to invite everybody because we figured in the age of COVID, why keep things limited to those immediately around us when we can open it up so everybody has the ability to learn and collaborate together. So I'm really excited to see 45 people here. That's pretty cool. I will just let you know that it is the time of COVID, and I'll ask for a little bit of grace. Today was my first day back at school. I went the longest stretches of not checking my email that I have been in a long period of time, which is like an hour. If you try to get a hold of me today and I didn't get back to you, I apologize. We're also, because I had a number of people email me and contact me today, we've sort of thrown some of our plans out the window. I don't think that everybody's going to be connected via tab room, either students or coaches. So we've adjusted the way that the format's going to work a little bit tonight so that for students that don't have tab room connections yet or that kind of thing, we won't have to worry about that. We'll still control. Our plan for the night is a pretty simple three-part 2 to 3 part evening. The first part, I'm going to introduce you in a second to a team of really talented congressional debate coaches. And we're going to start off by just going over some background information about Congress and kind of assuming people don't have any experience in this event, getting you familiar with terminology and the basics of the event. After we go through that, Mr. Halverson's going to lead you through talking about the event itself. We'll probably take a little bit of a break, allow you time to digest what we've gone through. We'll take some questions when we come back from the break, and then we'll break in. We were talking about going into breakout rooms to do some mock sessions, and I think what we're going to plan on doing, given the number of people, is we're just going to do a mock session here together as a large group. I'll probably create a breakout room at that point for coaches so that I can put coaches aside if coaches want to go have a quiet place to have a conversation. We'll walk through a Congress session. I'd also say this real quickly: the East High tournament next week has a novice division for Congress. So if you want another simulation, a Congress simulation for first year students where they don't have to worry about competing against the hot shots that have been around for a few years, just enter the novice division at the East High tournament. You'll get wonderful feedback from coaches. We always put coaches in the back of the round, especially with novices that have experience, and we'll work them through a chamber. So if this is your first time doing Congress or coaching Congress, that's a good opportunity to follow up on this workshop. And then time permitting and depending on how things are going at that point and where we are, we'll either have another question and answer session at that point. We'll play it by ear from there. I'll say that. So without further ado, I really want to introduce a team of people that are instrumental in making this thing happen and are going to be leading this tonight. The first person that's going to be working with you all tonight is Andrew Halverson. Andrew and I have coached together for, I think, 10 years now, 10 or 11 years. I can't remember how many. We both remember when we were skinny, and he knew me when I had hair, and I knew him in a different life. He is the reason that I know anything about congressional debate. He's the reason I know anything about debate in general. And Andrew convinced me that I should invest my time as a coach into Congress, and I'm forever indebted for him for showing me what a great event it is. And he's been coaching students to success in Congress since I don't know, somewhere around 2013 or 14, I think was the first time we had some people deep in elims and nationals. One of the people that's a former student of ours is in the graduate program at Newman University and was a competitor in student Congress and has been judging some virtual student Congress this year, getting his feet wet, and is going to be partnering and working on student Congress with us this year is Jordan Ogile. Jordan was, I think, a 2015 graduate of Capon, 2016?
2017.
17. He's younger than I thought. 2017 graduated of Capon, and Jordan was a national semifinalist for 2 years. I think I put in an email 3 years, and he corrected me. It was only 2 years, but he was a tremendous competitor. Understands what it takes to be successful as a student, and also now has had the experience to judge and see the other side of things. And he's invested in giving back to the community and wants to be a part of it. Also have my other assistant, Kayla Benson, is here somewhere. I can't, she's probably hiding behind my participants. There she is. Wave, Kayla. Kayla has probably judged more congressional debate rounds this season than anybody in the state of Kansas. And I say that with a smile on my face, joking, because at one point she had to remind me that she's a policy debater and she really likes to watch policy debate rounds once in a while. But I think that Kayla's judged at least 3 or 4, if not more, National Circuit Congress tournaments this season, on top of coaching the NSDA National Championship, a squad of Congress kids last year. And she has a tremendous amount of experience with like the virtual format and how it works. She's been judging it, she's been coaching it. And we've been lucky enough and fortunate enough to have some really incredible students that have had success this year. So she's going to be helping too. Just real quickly before we get into the nuts and the bolts, I will say this. You know, I sat back and I was thinking about today as I was in my classroom with kids, and I was explaining to them that back in January, when the COVID crisis, or it wasn't the COVID crisis at the time, when the word of a mysterious disease was showing itself on the far side of the Pacific Ocean. At the time, we were spending a lot of time in all of my classes watching the impeachment hearings. And I did that not because I'm a political junkie, but I am, and I'm a political nerd, but because I thought it was really important. It was a really great time for my students to get to watch how Congress really operates. And if you watched any of the impeachment hearings last fall, I mean, it was truly a lesson in the way that politicians use parliamentary procedure and the way that they use strategy to go about the game of politics. And it was cool to watch. I watched, you know, you watch the Republicans use parliamentary procedure to try to delay the discussions and try to push things off, and you watch the response. And there was a good presiding officer, in my opinion, during one part of the trial, and there was a better a worse presiding officer in one controlled the chamber much more effectively than the other. You could see the manner in which people engage, and it was really interesting for me to watch that. And you know, it made me think about why I fell in love with Congress. And there's a couple of reasons. I hope all of you will give Congress a shot the same way that I did. I can tell you that there's nothing that pains me more than watching a bad congressional debate round at a high school tournament. Okay, that's just the honest truth. It's like watching a bad anything. It's tough. But I'll tell you what, when you watch students who've invested time and have researched and can articulate clearly and communicate effectively, student Congress can be one of the most engaging and fun forms of debate that's out there. I just truly believe that's the case. One of the reasons I like it is, you know, as opposed to policy debate, or even as opposed to Lincoln Douglas and public forum to some extent, Congress really allows you the ability to choose a topic that is important to you, that you think is not just important to you as an individual, but something that's personal to you that should be important to everybody in society. It allows you to not just explore those topics, but to explore the manner in which the government could effectively work to try to resolve problems that exist in our society today. And one of the most intriguing things for me as I coach Congress is it's watching young people realize the limitations of what Congress can and can't do, and the way that they can or can't effectuate change, and the difficulties that there are in the political process. I think perhaps the thing I value most about this is it really gives a chance for you all to engage in a political simulation and see what it looks like in the real world. And honestly, I think real world political, understanding how to use your political agency in the real world is an important thing, because how you engage in the real world will matter. There are effective and ineffective people that engage in politics. And this is the opportunity for you all to learn how some of that works. So I would tell you 2 more things before I quit talking. I probably talked too long already. One is if you want to get a real life a view of what this event is in the real world of politics, I would implore all of you to turn on and pay attention to what's going to go on in the upcoming impeachment. If you get in the news and you get in Google News right now, you'll see a lot of discussion about the rules for the impeachment and how the rules are written and the dynamic between the parties and coming to terms. And if you like to study history, you can go back and see how different Congresses have come up with rules, and you'll see how the constitutional issues, the limit, a lot of the stuff that's there will come into play in this. And the other thing I would say that you could pay attention to right now that would be really interesting and be important to you in your lives is watch the discussion about the filibuster rule in Congress right now. This is a potential change in rules that could have long-term implications to how politics function for both parties in the United States. And as you read about the filibuster rules and the dynamic between the Republicans and Democrats right now, think about this game we're playing, because it's the same type of rules we're discussing. Why does it matter if there's 60 votes necessary to get cloture versus 50? What is the implication? So anyway, without further ado, I'm going to be quiet now. I'm going to mute myself, and I'm going to turn this thing over to Andrew to start going.
Hello, everyone. I know it's a little bit different, like Mr. Harris said, but I'm going to share my screen now. We're going to start a little PowerPoint on why I think Congress is pretty cool and about some of the ins and outs of Congress. Forgive me that I've been using Teams more than I've been using Zoom, so hold on here. There. So some important info. I put this link, I think, in the chat, but I think there's also a link to, if I don't have it, Harris or Ogile could drop that in for you all. But all the resources that we're going to be using today are in this Dropbox folder. It should be publicly shared with everyone. If not, I've dropped some of the links in the chat already, or one of the other people with @Astra can do that. There is a speech template. There is the congressional debate guide that Mr. Harris talked about, and a few other things that are pretty important in this particular PowerPoint. But without further ado, our agenda, pretty simple. What's Congress? Conduct and ethic, how to be a good congressperson. In other words, how to be good to your constituents and just be good to people. How does Congress work? We'll go through kind of a very rough shot view of how Congress works, how you're evaluated at tournaments, and what you could do post-tournament just to be better at Congress. Pretty straightforward agenda for what we're doing tonight. Now, everyone, why Congress? Everyone has a different flavor of debate that they like and enjoy, and I think Congress is a meshing of a couple of different forms. It's both speech and debate. It's the best of both worlds. Public forum, LD, policy, all are at some level, even though public forum is not supposed to be, pretty technical. It's hard to get wrapped around some of the terminology and how things work, but it's the best of both worlds. You get to speak and be a very good public speaker, but also be able to have clash and debate. It's not dueling orations. It's not just coming up and giving a canned speech. It's being responsive to the other people that are in the chamber with you. It's also more real world than other forms of debate. Other forms of debate have month or year-long resolutions where you debate an entire year, but this is supposed to emulate what Congress does. So there are a variety of topics, kind of like what Mr. Harris said at the beginning. If you author a piece of legislation that is something that's near and dear to your heart, you could talk about that at various tournaments. There are also a variety of topics based on the local or national or regional areas where you compete, on how people allow resolutions and bills to be put on their docket for their particular tournament. So in my estimation, I think more real world knowledge you get from Congress rather than from policy, public forum, or LG debate. Not that those debates are bad by any means, but this is definitely more real world. There's also some consensus building and diplomacy that's an added skill set that happens behind portable skills that you already learned with debate, like research and speaking, right? Even in a virtual environment, you have to be able to consensus build to determine what kind of agenda you're going to do, who's going to give speeches or what, and just a general decorum of the chambers that you're in, that you can't just be kind of, well, a butthead, for instance. You have to be able to work with other people. I know Jordan and Kayla and some of the other coaches probably can speak to this. You're going to do a lot of group projects when it comes to college. And to be able to start kind of interacting with groups now in a setting like this is important for what you do in college and in the future. Those group projects kind of can be a headache, like, oh, I'm doing all the work again. You have to find ways and strategies around that. And I think Congress presents that. This one is for coaches and also, I guess, also for students. It's not regulated by CASHA. You can compete in how and when you want. So, for instance, I'm really excited for this for the East High team. We're competing at Harvard this year. I've been to Harvard once when I was in college, and it was pretty awesome. And I wish we could take the kids there. But especially in a virtual world, you're able to compete at places like Harvard and Yale and in Florida and at the Glenbrooks. It's not regulated by CASHA. The other thing that is nice about it is you can do a lot in Congress with a limited amount of scarce resources. We all know that budgets are being cut back, resources are slim for a lot of debate and forensics teams in the state of Kansas. But the nice thing about Congress is instead of having an obligation of one judge per two teams or whatever at local, regional, and national tournaments at PF, policy, and LD, you have one judge for 6 to 7 competitors. I think that's the bigger bang for your buck as a program, that you can get 6 of your students out to compete somewhere and not have to rely on finding judges all over the place in order to compete. Also, I've experienced working with some people and meeting people at national tournaments that did not have coaches and were still successful in Congress. So the barriers to being successful, as long as you put the work in, are very few and far between, but you also get the biggest bang for your buck at the same time. Now, the technical definition of congressional debate, this is the NSDA definition. It's a mock legislative assembly. Students draft bills or positions, and they debate on and vote for that legislation. We submit a docket on what legislation and what order you're going to talk about. I don't know why that's there. And you caucus and deliberate beforehand on what order that's going to be in. To determine an agenda of what you're going to talk about, which is also nice about Congress. You get to control what you want to talk about. It doesn't just have to be criminal justice reform or some public forum resolution about nuclear first use. It's a variety of topics, and you get to choose what those topics are, which is what makes congressional debate so brilliant. Now, one of the things in congressional debate that I like quite a bit is there's definitely a code of conduct that happens that doesn't happen in other events. I think in your chamber, there should be respect given to your fellow competitors, and you should be inclusive as possible. There is a seriousness of purpose that you have when you speak. There's definitely some decorum. There's a lot more formal language involved. You're not just saying, hey, dude, you should vote for my legislation. You address people by senator and representative, and allow yourself to be just like the people in Congress. My fellow representative, Ogile, for example, speaking about those things, I think is rather important. I spoke about this before: cooperation, diplomacy, also just relationship building, and how you wish your legislators acted. Now, unfortunately, this simulation of Congress doesn't allow you to do something like establish a PAC and steal campaign money and go to jail for all the bad things that you did. But what you want to be a legislature that actually gets stuff done and then governs. I mean, it's a pretty common criticism of American government that nothing gets done. Well, you get to simulate in a Congress what you would do if you wanted things done your way. And that is what is brilliant about congressional debate. Now, the next thing that I want to talk about is how does Congress work? It's a little different than your normal debate tournaments. I broke this down into 3 portions. There is before the tournament, everything you're going to do at home and at school to get ready, practices and such. What happens during the tournament, and after the tournament, things you should know, how you get evaluated, and all those type of things. So let's talk about what happens before the tournament. Now, you want to do Congress, and I highly suggest that if you do Congress, you should write some legislation. I included a couple of pieces of legislation in the resources packet, and a lot of legislation you can get from the National Speech and Debate Association. Getting legislation is important for a couple of reasons. One, it's an idea that you get to advocate for in the chamber. So if you have a resolution, one of ours at East High is to condemn China for the Hong Kong national security law. If it's something that's really important to you, you get to talk about that. It also positions you in a chamber to have a speech that is uniquely yours to advocate for something. So you pretty much for most part, you have a guaranteed speech, all right? So when you write a piece of legislation, you should select a topic in which you think the federal government should act upon. There's 2 types, well, technically 3, but we'll talk about that in a second. 2 types of legislation that you could talk about. The first is a bill. It's a national bill, has national jurisdiction. When it's passed, it becomes law. The federal government would have the authority to implement it. So if it were something like increase the gas tax or do no nuclear first use, that would be a piece of legislation that the Congress could do. It's not as technical as actual congressional bills, because if you've ever actually tried to read a congressional bill, it's like reading War and Peace. And I don't know about you, but it's not really light reading. But it's a slimmed down version on what you would do to implement your bill in order to make this change that you think the Congress should do. The second type of legislation you can do is a resolution. It's a position statement. It doesn't really get stuff done, but it just says, like, here's our stance on an issue. For instance, to go back to the one that we're doing at East High, we're taking a stance on what we should do with China. We should condemn them. Now, our resolution doesn't suggest what policy action to take. It just says it's a pretty good idea to condemn them. In the real world, there are other resolutions that happen too, like National Speech and Debate Day is typically a resolution that happens or has happened in the Kansas legislature in the past, and also in the Congress. A recommendation to maybe increase gun control laws, those type of things are resolutions that you could propose. Now, there's a subset of resolutions, and you're probably asking yourself, well, what about amendments? Well, congressional amendments begin in Congress as resolutions, and you submit the resolution with the amendment as you would insert or delete or whatever into the Constitution within your resolution. So that's a subset of legislation. So if you had a piece of legislation that wanted to overturn Citizens United and create an amendment to the Constitution, this would be an opportunity for you to write said amendment, but write it in the form of a resolution. I didn't include them in the resource packet, but if coaches or students want them, I'd be happy to send any sort of templates, because there's certain templates you have to use for writing legislation that have numbered lines and the whole 9 yards. I totally spaced on sending the template, but write the legislation, first part before the tournament. The second part, researching the docket. One of the cool things about Congress is learning a lot about a lot of different things. And once you get the docket for your tournament or your district, it's time to divide and conquer. You should have af and neg arguments for each piece of legislation. Now, given that there is a large amount of research that has to be done, one thing I don't have on this PowerPoint is you should save all your research too. I don't know what you use for your storage for your arguments and such, Google Drive or Dropbox or some other form of storage, but I highly suggest that you categorize some of the legislation that you do over the years and create kind of a research index of things that happen, because some of the ideas repeat themselves. It will save you a ton of time in the future, and it'd be a nice starting point to start. But if you're not there, go do your best research on your legislation first, because it's your own, and then do research on everyone else's legislation. That legislation should be very robust. I don't know if I hear that when you're old like me, Facebook is something that people aren't on, or people are on Twitter or Snapchat or whatever. I don't know. I don't know who The Weeknd is, and they're playing at the Super Bowl. That being said, sometimes you come across social media really bad, like leftwingnews.com or rightwingnews.com. Those shouldn't probably be in your speeches, but you should have some good combination of news sources. My big one is scholarly articles. If you could find scholarly articles that take a neutral stance and find data to support information and arguments, that is so huge in the world of congressional debate, and huge generally when you make arguments talking about public policy matters. And books, that research should be very robust and as much as you can do on a particular topic. So you've researched everything, you've gotten everything together, and now you're developing speeches. Before any other speech you write, if you're doing Congress, remember the legislation you wrote? You need to write what's called an authorship speech on your legislation. It's your best speech. And then you should focus on all the other speeches you can do. The reason you write your authorship speech first is because it's the most important speech. You're the one setting the tone for debate. The best analogy I can give, if you've done policy or LD or PUF, is it's like giving the 1AC. It's this is the problem. This is why the solution should happen. Remember, we haven't talked about this. You only have 3 minutes to talk in Congress, which kind of is good because it keeps it more fast paced too. But in 3 minutes, you should be able to talk about why your legislation is the best. Then you should talk about and make 3-minute speeches for other pieces of legislation. Now, keep in mind that speeches should not be fluid, should be fluid and extemporaneous in nature. What does that mean? Well, it means that I see Mr. Abel, so I could pick on him because he judged me when I was a competitor. Mr. Abel would sit and I could watch him from in the back of the room when there was a dueling oration and someone would just say a canned speech that would just be a bunch of words on the page and read straight off of it. Now, it's nice to have either in this world a second screen or a legal pad that you can hold on to and kind of refer notes to, but just to read from the legal pad like this is probably not an effective way of communication. And be honest, when you watch people in Congress speak, do you ever see them put their face behind a legal pad, or do you watch any politician do so? No, because it destroys their ethos in trying to get you to believe what their argument is. You should focus also on organization, the evidence, which we've talked about earlier, and the language, a more formal language, and delivery. Remember, Congress is an event that merges public speaking and debate all into one, which makes it a wonderful, wonderful event, like I've said, in my opinion. Have a wide variety of talking points. This one, I don't think it's talked about a lot. In a bunch of the congressional debate that I've judged, lots of times people will take a recess and be like, do you have an AF point? or do you have a neg point, do you have a neg speech, do you have an ab speech? That's fine and all. And that happens at the national level all the time. If you're truly prepared, you should have a variety of talking points on both the affirmative and the negative for legislation. It means that you could be more active in your chamber, which is something that is a metric that both scorers and parliamentarians will look at in determining how they rank you. And it also just means you're well prepared, so you can always speak. Generally speaking, there are 3 types of speeches. We talked about the authorship speech already. The second one is the general debate, this clash. Not just spewing out arguments, but being interactive and applying your arguments. Always in debate, you should apply your arguments, and especially in congressional debate. So if I say something like, Representative Harris has made a valid point about this thing, but he is wrong on this, that's a direct argument that I'm clashing with him about. Or Representative Oja would like you to believe that this would help the economy. No, it tanks the economy and hurts jobs first. The Journal of Economic Progress states, and you know what I mean? Have those direct points of refutation. Those are important. And the other one that is really underlooked is the summary or crystallization speech at the end of a speaking cycle, which we'll talk about speaking cycles here in a bit. You want to be able to sum it up for the scorers and the parliamentarian and say, hey, the reason you want to vote for the legislation is all right here, and take all those arguments and package them up into a nice little neat package and wrap it up, which don't ever have me wrap presents for you, by the way, because I'm awful at it. And put a bow on it and hand it to the judge and say, hey, this nice package shows you what you should do when it comes to voting in this debate. So those speeches are, all 3 of them are important. Now, I included in the resource packet a speech template. It's pretty simple, honestly. You have an introduction. You have 1 to 3 points. I usually like 2, to be honest with you. 3 makes it a little wieldy in 3 minutes to give a speech. And if you start with this and fill some of the blanks and stuff of this out, first-time congressional debaters will be it'll be very easy for you. An introduction, something that hooks you in, transition to the topic. The thesis statement, which I also like to call the voting statement. Your introduction should also have a piece of something that says, stand with me and vote for, stand with me and vote against, or something. You should there should be 1 sentence in the introduction that I know that says, hey, Jordan says he's against this piece of legislation. I know that as a judge. I might have missed out on something, but I know that particular part. And then you can have your points. The first reason to affirm is it destroys the economy, and you can summarize evidence, and you can include warrants and other things. Those speech templates are in the resource packet, like I said. It's a nice way to start developing those Congress habits and those Congress, get your ideas all organized. So we've done everything before the tournament. You wrote some speeches. Hopefully they're extemporaneous and they're not dueling orations. What happens at the tournament? Now, this was kind of written in a world where we could see each other face to face, but I will add the parts that kind of make the virtual thing happen. Kind of like today in the Zoom room, we informally met and went about our business and then started talking about Congress. You will also do that. Usually they usually lump that in at tournaments with what they call a tech check-in to make sure everything works in the room. Typically chambers in a virtual world are between 12 and 15 people with up to 1 to 3 judges, parliamentarians or whatever. You'll go to the room early, you'll talk to your fellow Congress people and set the agenda of the order of the docket and other events. In a real world, you would find your name and code in the seating chart. And I really hope to be back to that soon because I like seeing people. And this is fun, but it makes me think I'm in the movie Surrogates. If you get that reference, then bully for you. At the beginning, the parliamentarian will call the chamber to order. And after you've done all this informal caucusing to figure out what the order of the docket is, what legislation you're going to talk about, that person will call the chamber to order and will also oversee the nominations for presiding officer and also the way the agenda is selected. Now, it's a bit complicated in a virtual world, but the method that's worked pretty well is a website called strawpoll.me. When this is done, I'll put the link in the chat, but whoever the scorer is in the session creates the straw poll for the presiding officer. You create all the listings and dump the link in the chat. Everyone votes. You refresh a few times as a scorer, see what the results are, and go from there. The agenda is pretty easy. You could do it right in chamber, but if you really wanted to use the straw poll for that, you could. But that part of it makes it a little bit easier. And like I said, I will write a note to myself to put that in the chat later. During the tournament, I talked about this a little bit. All speeches are 3 minutes. Be as exact as possible. It does not look good every time if you go 10 to 15 seconds over and the presiding officer will gavel you down. I've seen it happen in the virtual world quite a bit. It's loud and annoying, and there shouldn't be an excuse for it in a world where you have a computer and you can keep your own time. Use your phone. You're obviously not going to talk to anyone on it because you're going to be speaking. All speeches are 3 minutes, though. The authorship or sponsorship speech that I previously spoke about, those speeches introduce legislation, and every authorship speech has a mandatory 2-minute cross-examination period at the end of the speech. And we'll talk about cross-ex here in a second and how that works in a virtual world. The first negative speech that answers the authorship is not as scripted, but it also sets the tone for what negative speakers will talk about when it comes to ledge. Just like the authorship, all first negative speeches have a mandatory 2-minute cross-examination period. Other speeches will alternate affirmative and negative, in theory, after the first 2 speeches, and all of them will have a mandatory 1-minute cross-examination period. Now, there is an exception. Sometimes speakers speak on the same side twice. Try not to do that as much as possible. Your presiding officer will let you know that they frown upon one-sided debate, and it doesn't look good for scorers in the chamber. Now, cross-examination. If we all spoke at the same time in the Zoom room, it would be chaos. I would probably have blood coming out of my ears, and it would not be pretty. So we talked about this before. There's a limited time period for cross-examination, 2 and 1, 2 minutes for the first 2 speeches, 1 minute for particular ones after that. You have to be recognized by the presiding officer. So if Harris is going to give a question, I would say, Senator Harris, and then he would give his question. Not everyone speaks at one time. Remember, there's a limited use of Robert's Rules of Order in order to facilitate some order and decorum in the chamber. This is the one where people kind of deviate. I'll give my humble opinion, which is not necessarily anything that's in stone. Typically at tournaments, more tournaments have been using direct questioning rather than one question per person. So in a face-to-face world, it's really easy to point at people and be like, you get a question and you get a question after them and you get a question after them. That's hard to do. Technical issues, again, just the logistics of a Zoom room make it hard to do. In a virtual world, direct questioning makes more sense. And what that means is the first 2 speakers, and there are 2 minutes of questions. There are 4 30-second blocks of questioning that 4 different people in the chamber can take up. So Ojal could take up one, Abel could take up one, I could take up one, and Harris could take up one. And we go in succession, right? That makes it a little bit easier. It also makes it easier for the presiding officer to keep track of who's asking questions, to make sure that people who aren't asking questions get precedence over people that have been asked a ton of questions. The more questions you ask, the better. It reveals weaknesses in arguments, or it can strengthen arguments if it's someone that believes on the same side as you on a particular issue. I would say the majority, I don't think I've been to a virtual tournament where it's been one-on-one. And if it has been, the chamber usually changes the rules up and all agrees to do direct questioning just for ease of use. It has to be about the speech. It can't be about anything ridiculous, like, do you have a dog? No, keep it germane to what the debate is going on in the chamber. And always remember to be congressional. You are in a Congress, you're simulating Congress, and that is of the utmost importance in this activity. Last part of during the tournament, we talked about Robert's Rules of Order. In the Congressional Debate Guide that Mr. Harris put in the chat, there is a modified use of Robert's Rule of Order and also a recency or speaking chart in that packet that you can look at on how you make motions. I'm not going to go through every single motion you have to make. We'll probably talk about some of the stuff like previous question and setting up a docket and all those other things here in a second, actually. But we'll talk about that here in a second. There's recency and speaker order. The presiding officer cannot just favor their friends and just be, oh, you're going to speak all the time. That's pretty ridiculous. So there's an order and a method to the madness. We will get to previous question now because it's next on my list. I forgot that it was there. Previous question is the vote to vote. And that probably makes no sense to anyone, but it's a formality that says the chamber is ready to vote on the legislation. So if I call for previous question, 2/3 of the chamber has to agree that it is okay to shut off debate and vote yay or nay, pass or fail on the legislation. It's sometimes in some of the new pilot stuff the NSDA is doing, we move to a direct vote after that stuff. We could talk about that later, but for the purposes of this introduction of Congress, previous question is the motion that you make to go to vote to end debate on legislation and go to the next one. If you don't have the 2/3, you better have some people that are ready to talk about your legislation still, because otherwise scores and other adults in the room will probably be pretty upset with you. So previous question, the vote to vote, often called PQ. Do not say PQ when you make a motion. Call the motion by its name. Again, congressional forum. One of the tips I have right here is really important. Don't wait to the end of a session to give a speech. Always try to be at top of the speaker order. It shows that you're active. You're not running out of fresh ideas. If you continue to repeat the same arguments over and over and over again, it is a recipe for scorers to give you low scores. And we'll talk about the metrics that they use for scoring here in a bit. One of the things I have not included in the past is how to keep speaker order. And it's like, well, how do you figure out who speaks when? So this is a pretty simple example of this. Now, you'll hear this also called recency. And in the virtual world, two things happen with recency. One, you can have an automatic generated recency that the tournament gives you at the beginning to set an order, what I like to call the zero speech. Those work really well in keeping things like flowing pretty well, but that doesn't happen in every tournament. So sometimes people all start at this level playing field, and this assumes a level playing field. So if Senator Washington were to give the first speech in our speaker order grid, they would go right there. They give their speech, they do their thing, you question them. And then Senator Jefferson goes right afterwards. And then Senator Lincoln, and then Senator Kennedy. So we'll say that's one cycle of speeches, okay? So In the next cycle, let's say Senator Kennedy has an authorship speech. This is the reason why they're important. They get crossed off this list, and now they've given 2 speeches. All right. In the next people who have given 1 speech in order, Senators Washington, Jefferson, and Lincoln, all waiting to speak. Now, if Senator Clinton has never given a speech, they would be added at the bottom here in a 5th spot if we had that, because they haven't given a speech. They would have precedence over all these other people. All right. So this is kind of a rough way on how speaker order works. And see, Senator Jefferson decided to go afterwards. And then Kennedy spoke again because, they can't help themselves. And so on. So in case you missed it and you've tuned out, because, I probably would have, because I have the attention span of a gnat. Set an agenda in Congress. Pretty simple. What you want to talk about, what legislation. You elect a presiding officer. Actually, you flip those, by the way. You debate over legislation. Affirmative and negative, you alternate. And judges will nominate the top performers. Sometimes your chamber will vote on finalists, but that doesn't happen. I can't even remember the last time that's happened. But that just depends upon your regional norms. And then you get some medals and you go home. Pretty simple. So the tournament's over. How do you get better? Well, here's how you get evaluated. Score sheets will happen. It's not a Google Classroom. I forgot to delete that part from the previous iteration of this, but on Tab Room, you will have score sheets and information to look at and see what the scorers thought of your speeches. Remember, like I said before, always try to advance debate with the 3 types of speeches, and don't repeat an argument unless you're answering it. After the tournament, and these people evaluate you, some things that'll help you improve. Always be reading and editing. The world and arguments that you have are always changing. I guarantee there are people that are writing about your particular issue right now, especially if it's a China issue. Well, guess what? Biden's foreign policy towards China is way different than Trump's foreign policy towards China. You probably should have that and what geopolitics looks like in 2021 in a Biden presidency, or what domestic policy looks like in Biden presidency, or what the world looks like in general. The more recent and the more up-to-date and just the more knowledgeable you can be in improving your arguments on various speeches is important. Debate in chambers is dynamic, and that's one cool thing about Congress. You should never give the same speech twice. Even your authorships from one tournament to the next should have little nuances in them that change them from one tournament to the other, because you're working to improve that speech. There's also lots of practice speeches. The cool thing about Congress too, when you're a coach and also a competitor, is your speeches are 3 minutes. It's really easy to crank out a bunch of speeches and get some really good feedback from your coaches. There are Congress drills too that if coaches are interested in, I'd be happy to provide them with that information. And generally speaking, like Mike said, thanks for coming. It's something that both him and I look forward to doing every year. It's kind of like clockwork. After the state tournament, we sit down and talk about this and the way our season is going to go and what we can do to foster this activity that both of us love so much. I'm going to wait for questions, but I think it's probably time to take a break. Is that pretty accurate, Mike?
Yeah, I think that'd be a good idea. I think what we should probably do now is maybe take a break until 5:05. Give everybody or until 5 o'clock. Give everybody until 5 o'clock. That's a 6-minute break. Get up, chill out, and then we'll come back and maybe we can answer a few questions at that point. And then we'll start up walking through the session step by step when we come back. Okay.
Cool.
And then after we get through the session, walk through the session, Kayla has put together a short presentation for you all of just like the 3 most important things that she thinks everybody can take away from tonight as they prepare for their year based on her experience judging during this virtual season. So we'll finish the night up with that after we walk through a mock session. So actually, let's take the break till 5:05. Let's take a 10-minute break so everybody has plenty of time to get They don't rush. See you back here at 5:05.
Mike, what was the thing with the breakout rooms? There's like a gajillion of them.
Yeah, I created 5 breakout rooms to kind of show what a potential Zoom tournament might look like. And you know, for the East High tournament, this would sort of be an example. There's a novice house, house 1, house 2 in Senate. You know, every tournament could be different depending on how they're hosting it. But in this world, like in Zoom world, you would simply just go into the chamber that is the chamber that you're in. You could do caucusing in that breakout room before the session with the people in your chamber before the judges go in.
Oh, I'm cool. There was like 45 of them, and I was like, oh my Lord, what did you do?
Oh, I didn't mean to create 45. I thought
That was the number. 47 is what it says.
That's how many people are. 46 unassigned people that have been yet
to
put into rooms.
Okay, never mind. I was like,
if you scroll down to the bottom, you'll see like Kaylee Kloiber just practice moving themselves into novice house. In fact, if any of you wanted to practice right now, if you never moved yourself in Zoom, you could move yourself into a breakout room and you could see how that works. Kaylee is now in the novice room all by herself. Hey, oh, Katie West is going over there to say hello. Representative Katie West. Perfect. Cool. Kayla, you might have to run over there and talk to them about how to get back in a second. It's part of the process, right? Okay, we're gonna get started again. It's 5:05. I wanted to know when, you know, I've known Andrew for a long time, and still when I listen to Andrew talk, there's times where I have to be like, slow down, you're too smart for me. And I'm sure that you all probably have some questions after that last 45, 50 minutes. So if you do have some questions, now would be a great time to ask. And I would just tell Jordan and Kayla and Andrew, any of you can field and answer questions that people have.
Superb.
You can do it in the chat too. We'll answer them in the chat.
Yeah, if you want to put it in the chat, that's fine too. And I can moderate it that way. Oh, Kaylee Clue. Miss Cloy, Representative Kloiber, you're in the right place. We were just taking a break when you joined. That's why you were probably confused about what was going on. Representative Madison with a question.
So I have 2 questions. First one is, what is caucusing?
Kayla, Andrew, Jordan.
I can field this one. Caucusing is at the very beginning of a tournament before you go to your first session. You're going to find yourself probably in some sort of situation where you are going to meet up with the other senators, representatives in your chamber. So you're going to try and find those that you're going to be competing against, and you're going to spend a little bit of time assembling a docket, coordinating with them, negotiating with them, pushing your legislation where you want it on the speaking order, and just kind of figuring out room dynamics. Who's going to be the PO, who's going to be giving authorships, who has authorships for the legislation. So think of caucusing as your coordination and networking moment.
Thank you. And then my second question is kind of longer. So after an authorship speech is given, then is that when like the individual representatives will decide like whether they want to be for or against it or something? I'm still kind of confused on what happens next.
I can answer this question. So you usually decide, you can, and this differs for everyone, but some people decide even before the tournament even starts as to what side they want to speak on. But usually kind of in that caucusing time, you'll hear people say like, who has an AF speech for this bill, who has a neg speech for that bill, and you'll try to kind of organize yourself on AF and neg. And so you want to be prepared as to what side you're going to speak on for that bill, even before the authorship is presented.
And I want to go a step further with this because I think it's kind of a coaching and the way a coaching approach that you might consider within your squad. Like, I think that the most fun conversations that we have in debate practices are the nights in Congress practice where we take the docket for a tournament and we just start with the first piece of legislation and we look at it and we talk through it and we get on Google as a team and we discuss how is it written? Is this possible or not possible? What are the weaknesses? What did they miss? What did they nail? And it's sort of through those discussions before a tournament exists. Like, you've got to have your research together and kind of like have an idea of what everything is. But it's those discussions where we look at the details, where we talk about like, how do we want to approach this? What's the best strategy when we get into a session? And that's when this gets to be real fun.
It looks like we have a question from Mac. Looks like Andrew dropped the build templates in the chats. So Mac, make sure to reference the chat. It looks like we got bill and amendment and resolution templates.
Yeah, and then that link, I just Googled, just Google NSDA Congress templates, and it'll take you right to the NSDA website. And they've got Microsoft Word templates, they've got Google document templates, and I think they even have, what is the other one? Pages, whatever Pages is, maybe Wiki Pages, I don't know.
Something I'd like to add to the last question that was someone asked about, how do you decide which side you're going to be on? Do you decide before? Something I found was really helpful is being able to adapt. If the chamber is starting to trend towards more aft speeches, and if you're looking at the speaking order and you think you can slip a speech in, it might be helpful to switch from aft to neg if you've got both speeches written, or you think you can cobble together a decent speech. The speaking order is really a game of strategy sometimes. It's a matter of when do slots open up, and if you think that you have a way to, if you're low in the speaking order, if you have a way to get higher on it by flipping sides, then go for it.
There was another question in the chat. It says, can bills be changed at all during discussions, then voted on, or will the bills need to be passed in their entirety without edit? And that's a great question. So normally you don't make a lot of changes. However, you can make amendments. And there's like an amendment process that goes through. So you'll fill out an amendment form, which I think is in the congressional debate guide, and you state like what sections you want to change, what sections you want to change, what the new wording will be, and then we'll open the floor up for debate on the amendment. And so there'll be an authorship speech on the amendment, and then and neg speeches as to whether the amendment wants to happen. And then the chamber will vote as to whether you would like to adopt the amendment or not adopt the amendment. And if it passes, then the debate continues on with the new amendment added in. So say the debate is about like a COVID relief bill, and the like passage date is March 3rd. But then as a chamber, you decide that you want to make the amendment, so that way the implementation date is now like February 20th or February 1st or something like that. Then the debate becomes centered around the passage of the legislation being on that date instead of the date previously written into the legislation.
I would just say one thing about the amendment process. In my experience as a coach, it's not always most favorably looked upon by judges. It's often used as a game by students. Don't play games with it. It won't make you any friends. That said, amendments can be a very smart tool strategically if done right, but it's not something that you go into and just like wing your way through it or make arbitrary changes to people's motions or to their bills and resolutions. Be careful about it.
It also swallows up a lot of time because you have to deliberate. Sorry, what? Yeah. But yeah, as Mike was saying, it swallows up a lot of time deliberating about the amendment, negotiating the amendment, articulating the phrasing of the amendment, passing, and then voting on the amendment. So don't just throw out amendments just for giggle's sakes.
Yeah, I would add to that. You do not automatically get an authorship speech by writing an amendment. The pro-con speeches are up to whoever gets recognized by the chair. And I've seen some Congress students try to play games with the speaker order by writing an amendment so they can move up the list. It doesn't work, so you shouldn't try it. My experience has been that if there is some kind of critical defect in the legislation as written that's keeping a lot of people from voting for it, then an amendment to quickly fix that is a cool idea. And normally the way that works is somebody moves the amendment, it gets seconded, they ask for speeches, nobody raises their hand, they vote on it, you get back to the regular order. And you'll get decent scores from scorers that way. If you try to have a full-fledged debate on an amendment, unless it's something of major substance, your speech scores are probably going to be substantially less. So just as a matter of for your own use, amendments should be only used strategically if they're really necessary.
In fact, I saw what Mr. Abel talked about in playing with the speaker order firsthand in the finals of the Senate 2 years ago at NSDA Nationals, and it ended very, very badly for a person. So don't do it.
Yeah.
Good question. Representative Houston asked how much legislation is usually discussed during a session of Congress. Does it have a limit? I'm going to touch on this real quick and then I'll pass it off. It depends on the tournament you're at and the way the sessions are set up. In Kansas, we typically do hour-long sessions on a Friday night. Some tournaments, maybe instead of doing 4 hour-long sessions, we'll do 3 hour-and-a-half sessions. So it depends on how long each session is. The NSDA also has a pilot rule if you're at NSDA school and you're doing Congress and you want to go to nationals this year, where they're limiting debate on individual legislations to 8 speeches. That means in some of them, some schools are counting the authorship speech as one of the 8, some of them aren't. So that changes the number of pieces of legislation you have to be ready for, because if there's only 8 possible speeches and then automatically it goes to a vote, you're going to be doing more pieces of legislation. At the beginning of the season, you'll probably do fewer pieces of legislation because everybody's going to be struggling to get their research and speeches ready. By the time the season's over, I don't know, what is in an hour long, how many can you get through?
In an hour, probably, depending on how many people in your chamber, 1 or 2 in a session.
And this is where caucusing becomes really important. If there's a 4-session tournament and you're only going to possibly get through, 4 to 8 pieces of legislation, maybe 5 to 8 pieces of legislation, say, if the docket has 20 pieces of legislation that you could choose to debate about, getting your piece of legislation in the right spot becomes important. Okay. And this is where they talked about caucusing, who is there and who is not there. Okay, if these schools aren't here, let's move their legislation down. This is where sometimes schools that have more entries, can push to get things certain places and give things. There's a lot that goes into that, but
In my experience as a competitor,
for a normal Friday night.
Sorry, go ahead, Mike.
Go ahead.
I didn't mean to interrupt. In my experience as a competitor, if it's an hour-long session, you would max get through 1 bill and then maybe start another, and then you would go to recess. I've never seen anyone get through 2 unless it was 2 little minor bills that schools really wanted to push, and they only had a speech in favor and against. But do not count on getting through more than 1 in a session. So when you're setting a docket for a Friday night tournament, plan on max needing about 6 pieces of legislation total.
In one change, even since Jordan's did this debate, is we don't end speech, we don't start discussion over a piece of legislation and then take a break and come back and bring it back up again. And the reason is this: you have different scores each session, and that gives the opportunity for, you've got a new scorer coming in who doesn't know what's been said, didn't hear the authorship speech, didn't hear the first speeches of the debate, and that puts them at a disadvantage. So oftentimes in circuits, it's discouraged. If you're going to start a debate on a piece of legislation, start it and go through it. You all as chambers will have a lot of control over how you take breaks and when you take breaks. We try to get 4 hours of debate in. You could do 40 minutes and take an early break and try to double up the second session. There are things that can be done depending on the tournament. Any other questions? These are good questions. Cool. Andrew, you ready to do this? You ready to start walking through a session? Is that where we're at?
I think so. Unless there are any other questions that anyone has.
Okay, let's walk through a chamber, and here's kind of what I'm going to put some people on the spot right here. Kayla, Andrew, can I put you both on the spot? Okay. I want who wants to be Andrew? Be the parliamentarian. Kayla, will you be the presiding officer as we play this game? Is that cool? Okay. So we're going to play a game. This game is called Welcome to a Session of Congress. Andrew's going to be your parliamentarian / score. The parliamentarian's job, by the way, in some tournaments, they keep score and some they don't. Their job is to make sure the rules are followed. They're the person that understands how the chamber is supposed to be run. They're the one that the presiding officer will turn to if the presiding officer has a question about how things should operate. And in rare instances, they'll be the one that fixes things if they go off the rails. So Andrew's going to pretend to be the parliamentarian and the score in this session, which would be very much like what you might see on a Friday night tournament. And then he's going to start this chamber off just like normal. And Jordan and I are going to make sure that Kayla gets elected presiding officer without any problem. And then Kayla's going to start walking through as presiding officer, how she would run the chamber and the way a chamber session would be set up. I don't mind if you have questions as you go, as we get through these parts, raise your hand and ask them or put them in the chat and we'll get to them as we go. That's fine. So with that, Andrew, it's all yours.
All right, I call this practice session of at Astra Congress to order. I'm going to probably have some commentary in the middle of this, by the way, so bear with me. This would be the moment where the parliamentarian would ask for nominations for presiding officer, or at certain tournaments, the parliamentarian will ask the judges to talk about what they look for, like their paradigm in terms of Congress speeches. So if Mr. Harris was judging, he'd probably say something to the effect of, I'd really like it if you talked about Baudrillard a lot. The more you talk about Baudrillard, the higher your speaks will be. I'm joking, of course, but
if I was giving my speech, if I was judging, it would literally say, my name is Mike Harris. I'm the coach at East High. I coach a lot of different forms of debate, and I have a lot of experience on a lot of different circuits. I prefer speakers who focus on substantive debate and clash over specific issues. That means I want to hear you referencing each other's speeches and advancing the debate. Things that irk me are when you continue to say the same things that other people have said over and over throughout the chamber. Do your best, have fun. That's the most important thing to me. Good luck.
And that gives you some insight on what the judges are looking for at the beginning. When all of those are out of the way, I would say something like, we'll now open up the floor for nominations for presiding officer. And Senator Ojo?
I nominate Representative Benson for presiding officer.
Second.
And have a second. Representative Benson, do you accept the nomination?
I humbly accept this nomination.
Any further nominations for presiding officer? Seeing none.
I would
usually
say
there's someone will
point,
close. So usually the parliamentarian would close nominations here if there were multiple people. If there were multiple people, Kayla put it in the chat earlier, we would use this straw ME thing, and I would go make a poll. And actually, I'll just make one right now, just to show what you.
If there are multiple nominations while he makes that poll, what happens is each of the people that are nominated will be asked to give a speech. I can't remember how long that speech is. I would have to look that up. It's a short speech saying why they should be the parliamentarian. A lot of this is usually not an issue because during caucusing before the session, it's sort of informal arrangements are made where the POs are agreed upon by the people in the chamber. And if there are multiple people that want a PO, sometimes agreements are made where different people will PO different sessions to allow everybody the opportunity to avoid this discussion. What Andrew's doing right now is he's creating a straw poll, which will allow after the two people who would be nominated that they could vote. But we're not going to, Andrew, don't even worry. You can put that in there. But since there weren't multiple nominations in this instance, Andrew would do what? Move to a vote?
One thing
Kayla would be the presiding officer.
One thing I want to add real quickly, and I'm old school, so a lot of you youngsters probably haven't experienced this before, and it's a regional thing. This is not the norm in Sunflower. It never has been. But there were places where what would happen if there were multiple nominees for presiding officer is they would each be given a trial period where they would serve as presiding officer. And then at the end of the trial period for each candidate, then you would vote. We stopped doing that because, amongst other things, that put those candidates at a disadvantage for getting scores for being presiding officer because they're wasting their time with a trial period. I think West Kansas might still be doing that. Sunflower, as far as I can recall, has never done it. And really, I think that's for good reason.
The good old Flint Hills Congress practice right there. Then you vote and you get the gavel if you win.
To speak to what Aditya talked about, if there are usually multiple presiding officer nominations or nominees, each person gets 30 seconds to say why they'd be a really good PO. Like Kayla would say, I bake really well. I'm speaking for Kayla at this point. Or I would say, I like my sous vide machine and it's pretty awesome. I'll run an efficient chamber. Thank you. Or whatever. Some people, when you get to the higher levels, will name drop and be like, I was a PO at the Harvard tournament. You should vote for me. Those are kind of funny to talk about. Yeah, big thumbs down. But they'll explain why you should vote for them over the other person. But
sometimes people from Kansas go to big national tournaments and they'll be like, I was at Harvard at the elite Olathe Northwest Nighthawk Invitational. And be like,
Yeah.
ooh, what is that? Like,
Yeah.
it's that tournament in Kansas City.
And in addition, I would make too would be, because somebody asked the question earlier about caucuses before even things get started. Sometimes who the PO is going to be is part of the caucusing process.
Yeah.
And so then the chamber walks in the room and everybody knows we're all going to vote for Senator Benson as PO. And then that lets you quickly get into giving speeches.
And by the way, just again, if you want to be a presiding officer, talk to your coach, work on that. That's something that you need to be working on before the tournament. It's really difficult to try to learn how to be a presiding officer on the fly, especially in a virtual world when you would have to be navigating spreadsheets and all kinds of stuff. All right, we got a PO. So where are we at? Turn it over to the PO?
Yep.
All right.
Low. April touched on this, but most of the time when you get into your chamber, and like after PO elections, they'll give a little speech about the procedures. So I'll go ahead and do that for y'all now. Thank you all for electing me to be your presiding officer in this session. At this time, I will go over my in-house procedures. For timing, at 1 minute remaining, I will hold up a piece of paper that has 60 seconds on it. At 30 seconds left, I will hold up another piece of paper that has 30 seconds on it. It's probably backwards for y'all, and I just realized that.
No.
It's not?
Nope,
Oh.
it's perfect.
Interesting. Yay. And when your time is up, I will hold up a piece of paper that says time on it. You will then have a 10-second grace period while I will start counting down on my fingers. And when I get down to both fists, you will hear me audibly stop you, and that speech will be over. Each questioning wait, are we doing direct questioning?
Yes.
Okay. Each questioning session will last 30 seconds, and the speech depends on how many questioning blocks there will be. I do ask that when your time is up, you respectfully stop asking or answering a question so that we can quickly move on to the next questioner. I will type who the upcoming questioners are in the chat, so please be prepared to start asking questions as soon as the time is up for the previous questioner. The precedent is preset for speakers. It is usually in an online format. However, for selecting questioners, it will be at random and then by recency. I will count down from 3 and then pick the questioners that raise their placard the fastest. I do ask that you do not raise your placard until I am done counting in order to remain fair to the other representatives. At this time, I am open to any questions you may have about my procedures.
Now, I want to take a second and tell you something that I think is extremely important about presiding officers. If you want to win Congress as a presiding officer, that speech is your chance to shine. And if you don't believe it, you go watch the impeachment trial in the House Judiciary Committee and when they held their hearings, and go listen to the chair of the Judiciary Committee open up the proceedings and talk about, here's how the proceedings are going to be ran. This is how it's going to work. This is your chance. You have the floor. You get to impress the judges. Nobody else gets to speak here, and you get to write anything and talk about anything you want. So when I say presiding officers need to kind of be working on things in advance, it's because you need to know, like, what are my gaveling procedures? How am I going to indicate things? And that takes a level of preparation. So I really, really love a good PO that has a good speech. Smile, be comfortable, engage. Nonverbal communication is important in that speech. That's a really good opportunity for you to get good scores as a presiding officer.
Yeah, I also, if you couldn't tell, my speech is I pre-type it. Well, it's the East template.
Can you put that in the chat?
Yeah, I need some edits. I realized that while I was reading, but I will edit at some point and I will put it in the chat. But I'm trying to think what else I was going to say. Oh, I'm now open to, well, I guess we can start the debate.
Yeah. Now, while you're listening, it's very important that when the presiding officer talks, you do need to pay attention and listen to them, because their gaveling procedure matters. You need to know when are they going to cut you off? Like, that will affect your score. Some presiding officers are pretty chill and quiet. Some cut you off cold, and it makes you look bad in front of a judge. So you've got to be paying attention and understand how they're going to run their chamber so that you can succeed. The other one that's really important, I think, this year is she said, I'm going to go 3, 2, 1, and then raise your placards for questioning. She specifically said, please don't try to cheat. We know that you do it in the classroom and everybody jumps up early, but we really want to make sure that there's equity there. Go ahead, Jordan.
I don't know if we were going to cover this next, but I know we agreed upon the bills to discuss tonight, but would it now be the time that we discuss the docket? Somebody proposes it and it gets approved by the chamber?
Yep. Go ahead, Kayla. Roll on.
Sorry, I'm trying to finish this template thing. But I am now opening the floor for docket nominations. Also, don't be scared to turn your camera on, because during a real life Congress session, your camera should be on.
Oh yeah, let the teacher and me come out for a second. All right, so y'all need to get used to turning your dang cameras on. I said dang instead of the other word.
Darn.
Because the recording's on, because normally if you were in my classroom, that wouldn't be. Turn your camera on and get used to it. And I'm gonna say, it's not just me being like the old man griping because I don't get to see you and I'm trying to be mean. It's because I've been participating in a lot of academic conferences. I've talked to a lot of college professors and deans, and I have engaged in the professional and business world to a great extent. The expectation of virtual meetings is that you have your camera on. Now, it's that when you do these meetings, when you I don't care in the classroom what you do, but when you come in here, I would just suggest that you plan on having your camera on. That said, think about what your background looks like, how you engage. If you need to use the restroom in a virtual environment, I don't think that you need to interrupt anybody or ask for personal privilege. You can probably, Kayla can ask, you can probably turn your camera off and simply walk away, as that signals what you're doing. But the expectation from your judges is that your cameras will be on. You will also be getting evaluated. Like, your judges are going to be watching what you're doing while these speeches are going on, right? Your nonverbal communication matters. Are you listening to people and paying attention? Are you responding to what they're doing? That's going to matter. So just remember, your judges are going to be watching you the whole time.
Yeah, these are all things I'm also going to cover during the virtual, other things to know, and debating Congress virtually. Sorry, I'm trying to set up my spreadsheet. Something I'm going to share in the chat here is where I'm going to be. I'm going to put the link in the chat. This is the Google spreadsheet I'm going to be keeping track of recency on. Later I'll show you a more detailed one, but mine's not very detailed. But there's a speech recency and question recency. We have to vote on it to be an open chamber. And what an open chamber is, oh, can y'all not open it? No, let me try this again. Thank you. This is, I'm sorry. That's because I changed to anyone with the link in view. Okay, try now. There we go. My bad. I forgot to change the settings. Anyway, so this is something that you can do in your chambers, but when you get to your chambers, you'll have to vote on whether it's an open chamber. And that's what Harris was talking about, where you can just turn your camera off if you need to go to the bathroom or get some water. But as of right now, it's considered a closed chamber. So if you do need to use the restroom or get some water or take care of something personal, like if your dog is barking and you just need to let it out or whatever, you would need to call a point of personal privilege. And for me, you can just type it in the chat. You can just type point of personal privilege and I will type granted. In Congress, it's a norm that you wait until the speech is over or the questioning block is over to ask for personal points of privilege. And I won't recognize the comment until after the speech or after the questioning block. But that would be the time to do it. So after we get the docket nominations, if y'all want to have an open chamber, we can. That's something we can vote on. Also, if you have any internet issues, like if I start glitching out for you or any of that, type in the chat, or if you can text someone in the chamber and they can put it in the chat, if they just could be like, type in the chat and be like, Representative Balderas is having internet connectivity issues. That lets me and the other judges know that they are not present because of a technical issue. But if you ever have a technical issue, it's important that you let your judges, or you let your presiding officer, your parliamentarian, your judges know as soon as possible so we can get that corrected. That being said, I am now open for docket nominations. Representative Balderas.
I thank the chair. I'd like to propose docket 8 consisting of first, a bill to put term limits on Supreme Court justices, and second, a bill to abolish ICE.
Is there a second? Representative Mansour.
Second.
All right. Are there any other docket nominations? All right. At this time, I'm closing the floor for docket nominations. If you would kindly use the reaction button, although I'm going to deem it unanimous, if you can click the reaction button and vote yes or no for me. I will give you 10 seconds to do that. Don't use the thumbs up. Use it should say yes or no. Like green or
when you put the yes or the no up, you need to put it up and leave it up until they tell you to put it down.
yeah.
Okay? Because the PO has to go through and count it. Every time there's a vote, the vote has to add up to the number of people in the chamber. If somebody doesn't vote, they're going to go back and they're going to do the vote over and over until the right number of people have voted. So it's important that she gets everybody to vote.
Except for I think the problem with Zoom is that they go down after a while.
Oh, do they?
I think so. That's where I'm thinking the problem is heading.
We'll have to figure out a technical solution to that.
Yeah. We could just do it like this. Although some of y'all might not have placards ready, but just raise your hand in your little camera if you are in favor of the docket. Or you can see Representative Balderas has a placard, which we'll talk about later. If you do not have your hand up, I am assuming you are voting against my docket or Representative Balderas' docket, or you are abstaining, in which I would expect another docket to be presented. Okay, looks like we're good. Y'all can put your hands down. Actually, I'm going to put the docket in the chat here. I already forgot what the docket is. Representative Balderas, can you type the docket in the chat? Normally, if you're a presiding officer, you'll do better than what I'm doing right now. But
it might be because I told Kayla she was doing this at the point that you heard me say, hey, Kayla, can I put you on the spot?
Yeah, I have no idea what your bills are. I'm so sorry. Anyway. Okay. Representative Balderas put the docket in the chat. If you're PO, that should be your job. And that's just something you can do so that way the competitors and the judges know what's upcoming. But at this time, I am now looking for an authorship for a bill on SCOTUS term limits. Also, when you say that, you would say like the bill number and full name. I don't have the thing in front of me. Okay.
So here's how this works. If the school that wrote this piece of legislation is here, then they would get the first rights to give the authorship speech because they authored the legislation. An authorship speech is not a pro-con speech that you're for or against a bill. Yes, it does mean you're for the bill, but an authorship speech is your chance to shine. This is your chance to get up and stand up and tell us not just that, yes, we should support this, but why it's crucial, why now is the time, why it matters, right? This is your chance to give a politically charged speech, okay? Use that opportunity. If nobody from the school that wrote the legislation is in the chamber, then Kayla will say something to the effect of,
I am now looking for a sponsorship speech.
A sponsorship speech. A sponsorship speech is somebody who is researched and ready and recognizes that the author's not here and they want to give that speech. Great way to jump the speaker order, okay? Great way to jump the speaker order. I always tell my kids, figure out what schools aren't here and what their legislation is, slip that on the docket. You can get an authorship speech through sponsorship. I'm giving away too many keys to the kingdom here.
Okay.
All right.
So hold on, we're gonna do this again, except for I'm gonna see who our actual author.
Don't worry about it. We're just going to walk through it and pretend because nobody's going to have it. So I would be like, I would give my all. Go ahead.
Oh yeah, I'm now looking for a sponsorship speech. 3, 2, 1.
Now, if there wasn't an authorship or sponsorship speech, the presiding officer would look at you with disgust because you have put an item top on the docket and nobody's ready to talk about it. And that would be bad. But we wouldn't have that happen. Normally, we'd have one of those authorship speeches. And then after the authorship or sponsorship, there would be a questioning period. And that questioning period for the author is 3 minutes. Okay. And how many questions get to be asked in that 3 minutes?
4. No, it's 2 minutes.
Is it 2 minutes?
It's 2 minutes.
Oh, see, I messed
It's
up.
2 minutes, 4 blocks of direct questioning.
So 2 minutes, 4 people get to ask questions, 30-second question and answer periods. And then Kayla, after that is done, will say,
I thank the representative. You may now mute your microphone. I am now looking for a speech in negation. 3, 2, 1. Raise your placards.
Valderas.
Oh, yeah, Representative Balderas. Are we actually giving speeches now?
You can give one just to show what it would be like and how that would work. This is how you introduce yourself for a speech and how you prepare to do it.
I think the chair is Representative Balderas, spelled Balderas, from the great School of Wichita East High School, speaking for the first time today's legislative session in the negation. When all my judges, as always, I'm with leisure my superiors, so when my judges and my PO give me any visual signal, I'd be happy to begin.
Okay.
Thank
He did
you,
a lot. He did a lot of things there. He gave his name so the judge has a chance to find them on the ballot, spelled it out to buy a little more time, said how many speeches that he has given already today. This is his first speech, so the judge can make sure, oh, did I miss something or I got the right person? And at the leisure of my superiors, I'm looking for a signal. One big hint I have for you is if you ask your superiors to give you a signal when they're ready, wait for them to give you that signal before you start. There's nothing worse than having somebody say, just give me a signal when you're ready. And I say, and I'm looking down and they start and I'm not ready. Okay, so wait till they're ready.
Okay, with that, I will begin my speech. Representatives, the goal of the legislative body was to see a problem that faced our nation and our constituents and draft the legislation to fix that problem. Today, we are met with not a problem, but a faulty mindset and even faultier solution. It is because of this that I urge you all to negate this bill establishing term limits for the Supreme Court for 2 key reasons. First, the bill promotes even more divisiveness. And second, the bill is unconstitutional. So first, term limits for Supreme Court justices are a bad idea. They won't solve any problems and will make some existing problems worse and will cause new ones. The affirmation may try to paint you a story of reduction of the stakes of the confirmation process and thus the depolarization of it, but this mindset ultimately fails. This bill granting presidents guaranteed appointees would be then incentivized to seek out the most extreme of judges, knowing that they would only serve a short and capped term. And with that already extreme divisiveness in the Senate, this incentive would be exasperated. This bill, instead of bringing about compromise in the courts, would make the court a source of polarization in every single presidency instead of what is usually a more rare occurrence. Not only that, but the bill incentivizes poor behavior from the president, but as well as the judges they appoint. Judges, knowing they will likely need another job after they retire from the court, may well change their stances to fit potential employers. If a justice might want to work in a law firm, a foundation, or even an educational institution, they'll begin to think twice about how they vote on issues affecting such organizations. Representatives, this bill, championed as a bill of compromise, fails at its main objective. Stand with me and negate. Second, this bill goes directly against the Constitution, and even if granted solvency, cannot be put in place. Even if the neg would concede every single benefit the act would have to offer, you still negate due to unconstitutionality. So if everyone could flip to Article 3 of the Constitution, you could see that federal judges, quote, hold their offices during good behavior, end quote. This is universally understood by every constitutional lawyer to mean that federal judges have life tenure. As a result, to enact term limits and pass this legislation, it is necessary to first amend the Constitution, something that has not been done. But if one of my fellow representatives may try to argue the definition of offices in order to enact their legislation, they give themselves a chance to not fail only in words, but in writing. Because Article 3 makes a firm distinction between supreme and inferior courts. While the Constitution dictates one Supreme Court, it gives Congress much more flexibility to quote, ordain and establish other lower federal courts. Similarly, Article 2 of the Constitution sees the two offices differently. You see in Section 2, the president has the power to nominate ambassadors, other public ministers, and consuls, judges, and judges of the Supreme Court, and all other offices of the United States. And this deliberate separation of the offices is why you negate. Representatives, what you see here is not a solution, but what my chemistry teacher would call a glass of water half empty. Stand with me and negate a divisive and unenforceable bill. I give the rest of my time to the chair.
Thank you, Representative Balderas, for that speech of 3 minutes and 5 seconds.
Now, while that speech is going on, there's a couple of things that I would suggest that you are doing in the chamber. One is you should be taking notes as to what Representative Balderas is saying. You want to get down what their main arguments are so that as you're preparing your speech, you can incorporate references to their speech. If you're negating, you're working on a team. You agree with them. So you want to take the arguments Representative Balderas has made and elaborate and add to them. If you're on the other side, you want to take the arguments Representative Balderas has made, reference them, and explain why they're not true using the evidence that you'll present. So it's important. Step one is you got to listen and pay attention to what the people are saying and figure out a way to flow the speeches and to take notes.
Another thing I would suggest is that if you were the speaker, as soon as you do the whole part about like, I am now looking for a visual confirmation from those above me, as soon as you have that confirmation, you should pin your PO. So that way the PO is the only person you see. So that way you can make sure that you're seeing the time cards and you don't miss them.
And when she says pin the PO, that might be something that you, if you're not familiar with how to pin people and whatever system it is, talking about like make them your screen. That's who you want to look at. That's the person that matters to you. The rest of the chamber isn't so important at that part. And these are those subtle little tips online that will help you a lot this year.
One thing that I noticed during your speech, and this goes for everyone who's going to give a speech tonight, is in other forensics events, you'll always hear about giving a roadmap in your speech, of laying out a clear, concise structure for the judge to follow. And that's going to be equally important in Congress. Except that in Congress, it's going to be even shorter because the speech is that much quicker. You're going to want to give the briefest of roadmaps in the beginning, laying out what 1 to 2 or even 3 points you're going to discuss, have a clear introduction, transition into your points, wrap it up and sum it up very quickly at the end, so the judge can recall, okay, this is what he accomplished in his speech. This is the main takeaways, and that's why he wants me to vote for him. Because if you leave it kind of an amorphous blob of facts, it's hard to piece together what your main idea was.
Okay, well, I think if that's it, we can do a little questioning session. So all those with questions, please raise your placards in 3, 2, 1. Sorry, there's multiple screens, so I'm going to check the other screen. Representative Mansour.
I thank the chair. Representative, you said that in Article 3 of the Constitution, justices shall hold their offices during good behavior, but what prevents them from continuing to hold office but on lower courts?
Nothing. Oh wait, no. Yes, the federal. Wait. So the qualifications for the SCOTUS and for federal judges are the same. So if you behave badly in while being a Supreme Court justice, you wouldn't be able to hold office in a federal court. Thank you,
Representative Mansour. Representative Mansour, seeing there are no other questioners, would you like another questioning block? Also, if you have questions, keep your placards raised even after I recognize Mansour as the first questioner, so that way I can put your names in the chat. And then once you see that there are 3 more questioners in the chat and that's all, you can put your placards down. Or the PO will do something like this, where it's like an indication to lower your placard. But if you have any, I'll do it right now. If anyone has any questions, you can raise your placard or your hand, or.
We might not have any questions, so.
Joshi, Representative Joshi's got some questions.
All right.
Hey, Representative Balderas. So If in the status quo, Supreme Court justices can retire whenever they want and Senate leaders can confirm justices whenever they want, how does the passage of this legislation lead to more politicization?
Because the president gets even more influence of what he already has to appoint justices, and it makes the—
How does he get more
process
influence when
more—
that influence ends after a certain amount of years rather than lasting a lifetime?
Yeah, but it happens more frequently.
Right, but even though it happens more frequently, doesn't that mean that the presidents that our constituents vote on have—
Now, what you saw there is something that you should pay attention to. 30 seconds isn't a lot of time. You might not get that last question out. You might get cut off, and you have to pay attention to the amount of time you have and how you want to use that time. You don't want to get cut off in the middle of a question, not able to get it out. Or maybe you do want to kind of make a point by asking a question and they don't get a chance to answer it. Okay, you can use that strategically to your benefit, how you see fit.
Representative Klober, do you have?
Hi. How does SCOTUS cause more problems, and what problems do they create?
Yeah, so it just makes everything more political. It drives more polarization as it happens more frequently than it already does, because the only reason you would get a confirmation into the Supreme Court is when someone would die, and that usually happens, after a long time.
Okay, thank you.
The chair will absorb the remaining of that block. We have one more questioning block if anyone else wants to be brave and ask some questions. My other screen. No? Okay, well, I'll absorb the rest of that. I'll absorb the rest of the time. Normally what you could do is like, so I asked you saw me ask Representative Mansour do this, but sometimes like if there's excess time, the chair will ask like, Representative Mansour, would you like another questioning block if no one else has their placard raised, and they can either like accept or decline.
I would say this, what you saw tonight is not what you'll normally see at a tournament. It's usually the opposite, where you have like 25 people raising their hands to ask questions, and she's very much having to choose who gets to ask questions. So, all right, you're on, Pio, keep rolling.
But at this time, I'm now looking for a speech and affirmation. All those with speeches, please raise your placard in 3, 2, 1. Check the other screen. Representative Joshi, you have the floor.
Hello, my name is Representative Joshi, spelled Joshi, from the esteemed school of Wichita East High School. My code is JOSHI, speaking for the first time today in negation of this legislation. Just a thumbs up from all of those above me, and I'll be happy to begin.
Wait, negation?
Affirmation.
Okay, just wanted to make sure. Now, I did that the wrong way. Point of order.
Representative Harris, you're recognized.
Okay. Shouldn't it be a speech and affirmation?
Yes, it is. I didn't catch that. Might be. Representative Joshi, do you have an aff speech or is it a neg speech?
No, I think you were right. I misread it. It was I have an aff speech.
Okay, well you can have the floor then.
Let's go.
You're good to go.
Let's go. Okay. President William Howard Taft once said, "Presidents come and go, but the Supreme Court goes on forever." President Taft was expressing the very problem that exists in our society and government today, the Supreme Court. Today, I'm in affirmation of this legislation to establish Supreme Court term limits because first, the Supreme Court as it is today is outdated, and second, because the American people are hurting and we have a moral responsibility to support this legislation. First, the Supreme Court as it stands is simply outdated. This uniquely makes the environment in the United States exponentially more political. With the insurrection at the Capitol just a week ago and the general ecosystem in our country being at an all-time high considering tension, this piece of legislation is exactly what the United States needs right now. Unlike what Representative Balderas would like us to believe, the Institute for American Progress reported that the growth in power of the Supreme Court has contributed to the political nature of the confirmation process. Because there is no regularity in vacancies and each justice can now be easily expected to sit on the court for multiple decades, Senate leaders have a strong incentive to upend the confirmation process in order to secure a justice appointed by a president of their same political party. In addition, presidents are incentivized to select nominees with records that demonstrate that they will likely rule in lockstep with the party's ideology. Supreme Court selections have always been political in nature to a degree, and sitting justices themselves have contributed to this. For example, when Chief Justice Earl Warren, a noted progressive, retired after 15 years on the Supreme Court, he originally submitted his resignation to then President Lyndon B. Johnson to avoid having a potential Republican president choose his replacement. Representative Balderas says that this legislation would give our president too much power and simply make the confirmation process more political. However, our constituents vote on the president every 4 years, and that office reflects what they believe more than the Supreme Court does in the status quo with justices that were enlisted into office decades ago. Our constituents are hurting. We can't keep turning a blind eye to the pain while we were ousted from our own seats in this very room just weeks ago. Stand with me and affirm. As a democracy, it is our responsibility to uphold the key values of representation and justice. In the status quo, none of that is the case, as 9 people have the supreme power in our land over 330 million constituents. In front of us, we have the solution to that problem in this legislation right now, as the Inquirer reports that it's undoubtedly imprudent that American jurisprudence, which touches the lives of countless individuals, is based upon the morality of simply 9 individuals. It's a breakdown of democracy when one of those 9 individuals manipulates the timing of his or her retirement to coincide with the terms of a president he or she personally finds politically palatable. So, when Representative Balderas talks about violating the Constitution, I would argue that our very founding fathers that wrote the Constitution would have us prioritize the lives of our constituents more than a few of the words that they wrote. Representatives, it's time we begin prioritizing what our constituents want. Stand with me and affirm.
Thank you, Representative Joshi, for that speech of 3 minutes and 8 seconds. I am now looking for questioners. All those with questions, please raise your placard in 3, 2, 1. Representative West.
Yes. So you said that 9 people have the supreme power in the U.S., but wouldn't they still have the supreme power even though they're being voted in and they have term limits? It's still the problem of having 9 people over all of us, right?
Sure, I would argue that when we do have term limits on Supreme Court justices, that supreme power more accurately reflects what our constituents want, because they're voting on our presidents every 4 years and those terms expire. So we have new presidents in office. They will more likely
Representative Burmaster.
Representative Yoshi, you argue that with going against the legislation that they will give too much power to a certain president. How would wouldn't that continue if the terms are shorter, meaning that presidents would give more power to change who is in the Supreme Court?
Sure, I don't think that's the argument that I'm making. I think the argument that I'm making right now is that the Supreme Court doesn't accurately reflect what our constituents want today. It reflects what they wanted 30, 40 years ago.
Representative Ojile.
I wonder if you could provide any statistics validating that Americans in the status quo approve of this legislation.
You know, I didn't really bring up any of those in my speech, but what I can provide is the fact that the American people vote for the president. And go ahead.
So there's no indication whether the constituents that you represent even want this change?
You know, I'm sure there is out there. I didn't bring that up in my speech. However, what I can provide for you is the fact that the American people vote for the president. And if the president is making these decisions more rapidly and in more short timeframes when these term limits are established.
Representative, seeing that there are no other questioners, Representative Ojile, would you like to absorb the remainder of the...
I yield the rest of my time.
Okay. The chair absorbs the rest of the time. Thank you, Representative Joshi. You may now mute yourself. I am now looking for a speech in negation. All those with speeches, please raise your placard or hand in 3, 2, 1. Representative Klober?
Hi. My name is Representative Kloiber, and I believe I am giving a speech in negation of abolishing ICE. If everyone is ready.
It should be, we're still on SCOTUS term limits.
Oh, dang it. Then never mind.
Okay. It's okay. I am looking.
Hold on. Kaylee, don't be discouraged. That was the coolest thing that I've ever seen anybody do, because you're the only person in this group of 45 people that had the courage to do that. So
Yeah,
you're going to give that speech in a second.
we can't. Representative Mansour.
I thank the chair. My name is Representative Mansour, Mansoor, speaking for the first time in this legislative session, and I am now at the leisure of my superiors. If I can just get an indication. All right. My fellow representatives, the issue that we are debating today is the same issue that our founding fathers also debated when they were crafting the Constitution in 1787, and that is the question of whether the Supreme Court should have term limits. I argue that no term limit should be imposed upon the Supreme Court because for two main reasons. First, this bill doesn't actually do anything, and second, there are major flaws within this bill, specifically regarding implementation. So first, this bill actually doesn't solve any of the problems that it would claim it does. So according to Ayara Shapiro, writing last year, these 18-year term limits to the Supreme Court simply do not solve any of the problems that authors of this piece of legislation would have you believe. So first and foremost, authors point out that there will be a lack of partisan fights if we were to pass this legislation, as if that all these issues will go away. However, that's simply not true, because let's say a Democratic president and a Republican Senate might disagree over whom should become the next justice upon the Supreme Court, can result in deadlock and gridlock, which is of course not fix this problem. Furthermore, if we were
Representative Mansour, I have pressed pause on your time because unless it was just on my end, you cut out. Okay, so you're at 140.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, I didn't notice that. I'm sorry. All right.
Hey, real quickly before you start back up, I think that what you just saw is probably important for not just you all competitors to see, but also for coaches to see. That is something that can happen in any round, and the way that we deal with tech glitches is just what we did. The POs will try to pause the time and allow people to start back up. We've been trying to offer the same grace in competitions as we do in the classroom for people. And so the chambers have been very considerate of each other's needs when it comes to this stuff. It hasn't been a problem that I've seen in any tournament. If it was an ongoing problem that Representative Mansour had with tech, I would tell their coach to get with the tournament director, or who would, somebody to try to resolve that problem between sessions or something like that. All right, go ahead, sorry.
Yeah, and just like, I'll talk about this later in my kind of online environment, but something that a lot of people have been suggesting is like, maybe if it starts happening like to a lot of people, like if we start seeing a pattern of everyone cutting out during their speeches, I will ask that everyone turn their cameras off unless you are recognized to speak. But given that it's only been Representative Mansour, we'll keep our cameras on for the time being. But these are just like a few tips and tricks of ways to like kind of better your bandwidth and communications to prevent the glitches. But Representative Mansour, you are at 140 if you want to pick back up.
Thank you. Yeah. Could you remind me, like, what was the last words that you heard or like understood, if that's possible, like so I can know where to leave resume?
Pretty much like just go back 5 seconds from where I stopped you.
Okay, all right, thanks. Okay, so and we'll go. All right, so authors of this bill will have you imagine that excuse me. So anyway, continuing, let's say that a Democratic president nominated a Supreme Court justice, but a Republican Senate blocked that nominee from entering the court. We would have more gridlock and more partisan infighting. Furthermore, if the stated goal of this bill is to reduce the amount of time justices spend on the Supreme Court to make it more representative, this bill simply will not do that, because nowhere in this bill does it prevent a Supreme Court justice from taking on another 18-year term and having it and assuming another term. So this bill does not solve that problem either. And furthermore, the bill states that the current justices of the Supreme Court will not actually be affected by the term limits. However, it takes an extremely long amount of time for vacancies upon the Supreme Court to happen. So we have scenarios where justices could be intermingling with, could be on the court with other justices who don't have the term. And what if one of these terms, one of these justices vacates their office when it's not a year in which the president must appoint a justice? There are just way too many loopholes in this legislation that simply cannot allow its passage. We must stand in firm negation of this bill, not only because our founding fathers knew it was wrong, but because of the many loopholes within it. With that, I yield my time back to the chair. Thank you.
Thank you, Representative Mansour, for that speech of 2 minutes and 50 seconds. I am now looking for questions. We are now entering a 1-minute questioning block. All those with questions, please raise your placard in 3, 2, 1. The other representative, I can't see. It's Representative Denise. I can't see your full last name.
Okay, so back to Representative Mansour. So your main negation to this bill is that it will only create more bipartisan gridlock between both the Democrats and the Republicans in the chamber.
Yeah, so basically, if we were to pass this bill, nowhere does it make it, less partisan of an issue, the Supreme Court confirmations, because it's still political parties nominating and confirming these individuals. Is there another question?
That is all the time we have for this questioning block. Representative White.
Representative Mansour, in the beginning of your speech, you said the founding fathers set this, but that would have been 234 years ago. So don't you think it's time for us to go back and look at these term limits and see if we need them?
Yeah, but our founding fathers, they still, the ideals for which they stood for and the reasons why they didn't enact term limits are, the same reasons we can uphold to this day.
But in the past 234 years, wouldn't you, as we've seen, America's changed. So why haven't we changed some of the fundamental values?
Yeah, because although the values change, the system does not.
Representative, that is all the time we have for questions. Thank you, Representative Mansour. You may now mute yourself. I am now looking for a speech in affirmation. No, Representative Madison, you do not, but it's highly encouraged. But Representative Madison, would you like to give a speech?
Yeah, I'll try it. My name is Representative Madison from Wichita East High School. I'll be speaking for the first time this session. As always, I'm at the leisure of my superiors, and we'll look for visual confirmation from the parliamentarian and the PO before I start. Also, can I have time to pin the PO real quick? I forgot to do that.
Good. If you just right-click me, it should say pin.
Okay.
You just click that.
Yeah, okay. Got it. Oh, I'm on full screen. Okay, sorry. So the reason that we have judges to serve a long-term sentence is to depoliticize the court, as wisdom and experience leads to reasonable and moral judgments. This bill would cause more decisiveness in the Supreme Court, as justices would be cycled in and out of almost as often as members of the House of Representatives. Although 9 judges allow for a simple majority, that means that unanimous decisions will become more and more rare and cause 44% of the judges, which indirectly represent our constituents, to lose out. We need long-term judges in order to protect the people who have been put in government. 4 federal justices have been assassinated since 1979, and the number of threats is still skyrocketing. That's all I have, sorry.
That's great. I am now going to absorb the remainder of the time. All those with questions, please raise your placard. Seeing no questions, I will absorb that time. Thank you, Representative Madison. You may now mute yourself.
And the most terrifying moment of a novice's first time in a Congress chamber is now over. The speech has been given. You'll never have to give that first speech again. And so lucky nobody had any questions for you that stumped you and made you look crazy. Like, perfect. Perfect way to do it. All of you get your first speech done as quick and early as you can your first tournament.
Yeah, as someone who was once a novice in Congress, I can say the first speech you give is the worst one, and it's okay because in novice Congress, no one knows what's going on and everyone's getting the jitters out. So it's okay. We learn in this crazy world together. But I'm now looking for a speech in negation. All those with speechers, please raise your placards in 3, 2, 1. Sorry, I have to check double screens. Representative Denise.
Hello, my name is Representative Denise. This is going to be my first time speaking, and if the superiors are ready, please give me the signal. Okay, perfect. The Supreme Court justices are appointed by the standing president and therefore should uphold the great duty and honor of being in the Supreme Court. If there were to be a limit to the Supreme Court justices, there would then their acting serving duty would not be upholded by their constitutional right. In the Constitution, it states that the Supreme Court justices should uphold the duty of supporting the Constitution at its highest honor. Therefore, the Supreme Court justices are held at a higher responsibility than any other justices in the entire legal system. And if we put a limit to these Supreme Court justices, then we're limiting the time in which America and the Supreme Court justice itself can go through the process of putting these legislations that are being upheld to the highest honor. And with the current Supreme Court justices now, we have a very diverse set of people, more from different generations than other previous justices before. And with the justices being of different ethnicities, colors, and race, they now bring a more diverse conversations. Many may say that they are getting too old for the time and they can't process things. But if their sole duty is to protect the law, and that is why they were sworn into office before, and the presidents are seeing that they have the potential to withhold the law and the Constitution itself, then there should be no reason at all that the Supreme Court justices should have a term limit in the Supreme Court. And therefore, I yield the rest of my time.
The chair will absorb the remainder of that time. We are now entering a 1-minute questioning block. All those with questions, please raise your placard in 3, 2, 1. Representative Houston.
Okay, so in essence, what I got from that speech is that by adding a term limit, you would decrease diversity. How would adding that term limit decrease diversity when you have more chances to insert more diverse characters into the justices?
That was not the entire point of my case. I was just stating that this Supreme Court justice system that we have now and the justices on the Supreme Court that are currently standing are a very diverse set. I wasn't saying that creating a time limit would essentially decrease conversations.
Representative White.
Okay, so you stated that there is different ethnicities, colors, and race, but do you know the exact balance of Democrats to Republicans to others on the current Supreme Court?
If the Supreme Court were to actually have decided it based on whether they were Democratic or Republican, then that would be more lenient towards one side. Therefore, they wouldn't be upholding the law fairly as it should be.
Okay. I yield the rest of my time.
Right. The chair absorbs the remainder of that time. That is all the time we have for questioning. Thank you, Representative. Is it Hirchetta?
Yes.
Hirchetta. So I now see your last name. You may now mute yourself. At this time, I am now looking for a speech in affirmation. All those with speeches, please raise your placard in 3, 2, 1. Seeing that there are no speeches in affirmation, and if I'm wrong, you please interrupt me and tell me. I'm going to move on, and I am now looking for a speech in negation. Seeing that there are none, Representative Balderas.
Motion and previous question.
Is there a second? Representative Mansour?
I second.
All right. The motion to call the previous question has been entertained and second. All those in favor of calling the previous question, and so this is us voting to if we want to stop debate and go vote. So this isn't the full vote. This is us voting on whether we want to vote. Kind of confusing.
The previous question, it works like this. Sometimes before they put limits on debates could drag on forever and ever because there'd be huge chambers and everybody wants a chance to talk. Previous question was a way for the chamber to end that discussion when they decided that they didn't want to continue to hear the same speeches over and over. There's a whole lot of how that should be or could be used. But when they say this is a question, this is a vote over whether we should end debate, that's because that's something that, you might have friends that want to speak in the chamber still. You might have teammates from your school that want to speak. I've watched teammates accidentally mess up and close the question down right before their teammate was supposed to speak. And that creates frustration. So be careful about these votes for previous question. Usually your squad should have somebody a more advanced person that sort of knows what's going on in the chamber and can give a signal how your team should be responding to this. But all right, go ahead.
Yeah, and I'll also say, depending on the tournament, at some tournaments you can't call the previous question if there are still speeches because speeches come before motions. So if there's a question of the previous question, like if someone makes the motion to call the previous question, just interject, say point of order, I have a speech in affirmation or in negation, and that should shut down the voting process entirely. And we would move on to whatever speech you have. Because we think that people should give speeches.
And this also is why, though, it's really important to go first or to go early in the session so that you're not stuck in a position where everybody is making the same arguments on the same side and you're just keeping things going to give speeches. Your judges will reward you for speeches that advance argumentation and making new points. The longer you wait, the harder it gets to do that.
Okay, but now we're going to vote on the previous question. So remember, this is us voting to vote. This is the vote that will determine if we move on to vote on the bill.
You have a personal privilege in the chat.
Oh, yes, Representative White. Actually, Representative White, we are going to vote and then take a break. Can you just stick around for like a minute, one more minute? Awesome. So all those in favor of calling the previous question, please raise your placard or hand. All those in negation. All those abstaining. Looks like it's unanimous. We will now move on to voting on legislation item number 10, a bill to establish term limits for Supreme Court justices. All those in favor, please raise your hand or placard. And can you do it in the window so I can give time to count? So if you're in favor of the bill, raise your hand and I'll count those up.
And remember, everybody has to vote on every piece of legislation. Abstaining means you don't want to take a position, yes or no, for some reason, and you are just voting that you are present and you are here. But everybody in the chamber has to vote on everything. So.
And I do ask if you could not turn your cameras off or press any buttons at this time, because when you do that, it moves y'all around and I can't tell who I've counted and who I haven't. So, okay, I'm going to do it again. So if you're in favor, please raise your hand in the screen so I can see.
It doesn't matter if you vote for or against something. Nothing about how you are rated or scored in this is based on whether a piece of legislation passes or not. So you don't have to worry about how your vote goes unless there's somebody on your team who's going to be mad at you because you didn't vote for them.
I got to write this down. I don't think my math is going to be right, but it's okay. We're just mocking it. All those in negation of the bill, please raise your hand. There's so many people. This is actually very difficult.
We're going to pretend we're not going to make Kayla count them all. Typically, your chamber is going to be less than 15 people. So it would be very quick for the PO to be able to count through the 15 people on the screen.
Yes. And so I'm making up numbers, but on a vote of 18 to 11 to 0, the bill passes. At this time, I am now entertaining a motion for a short 5 minutes. Harris, you can set the recess limits.
I make a motion that we take a short recess of 7 minutes till 6:25, and at 6:25 we return to wrap up final tips and tidbits about online Congress competition. Have one more question and answer period if anybody's got some things they want to talk about, and then we'll start getting people out of here for the night.
Alrighty. Is there a second? Representative Balderas? Actually, no, Representative Madison. I saw you want to do that. Yeah, Representative Madison, do you have a second? Yeah.
And a cool presiding officer trick, you can be like, without objection. And that means unless somebody says no, you're just assuming everybody votes yes, and you're going to go for a recess.
In-person debate, we would just go all is in favor and say aye, and then, but that'd be too much of a mess here. So I'm gonna say without any objections. Okay, let's go ahead and take a quick recess until 6:25.
Okay, we'll come back at 6:25 and we'll finish this night up and get you out of here. This has been awesome. Thank you all for sticking around.
If you do have any questions though that you would like us to answer or cover, if you could type them in the chat now, and when it comes time to the question and answer, we would be glad to answer them at that time.
All right, my clock says 6:25. If anybody's here hanging out here, turn your camera on so I don't feel so alone. If it's just me and Andrew, that's fine. We're used to that. Oh, there's everybody here. All right. I forgot to introduce to you all to Mr. Abel earlier. Mr. Abel, if you don't know Mr. Abel, was a coach in Kansas for a lot of years. He was the Sunflower District chair from is one of 2 chairs of Sunflower District in its last 25 years. Nationally recognized as District Chair of the Year, and he's been working with Astra to set up this Congress stuff. So he has a perspective that's even greater and above and beyond mine or Andrew's or anybody's, because he was coaching people like me and Andrew. Not to date him, but like he just has a wealth of knowledge and experience, and I should have introduced him earlier, and I meant to do that. So apologies. What I want to do now is I think we want to open that back up for questions. We'll do one more question and answer session, and then Kayla's got a quick presentation. I'll open it up from any final comments from Jordan, Kayla, Mr. Abel, Andrew, and we'll get you all out of here. So questions, now that you got to see a session. I should open the chat, just make sure. Everybody's tired. It's been a long day. Okay. If you don't have any questions and you come up with something, it's cool. Ask your coach. If they aren't sure, they can reach out. You can get hold of Andrew or me or Kayla or anybody, and we'll be more than happy to talk to you. Kayla, do you want to go over real quick just some last minute tips and tidbits for everybody before we get everybody out of here?
Of course. I'm going to share my screen really quick because I have a small little presentation. I'll keep it short and sweet though. I pinky swear. Share it. There we go. How do I present? There we go. Okay, so I'm going to be talking about kind of navigating virtual student congress. A lot of this has already been talked about tonight. I'm muted. I was muted that whole time, wasn't I?
Nope.
No?
Nope. You were talking the whole time.
Dang, my mic said I was muted. Anyway, I'm going to just be I'll keep this short and sweet because I know everyone's tired and wants to get out of here. But a lot of the stuff I'm going to be talking about was some stuff that you saw tonight. And I'm just going to go into a little bit more detail about it and talk about my experience. Like Harris has said, I've judged 6 virtual Congress tournaments now. I went and looked because I was very curious. A lot of TOC national circuit. I got to judge the finals of the New York Bronx tournament. And so these are a lot of the things I'm noticing that they are doing. And of course, with every tournament comes a new adaptation. So take everything I say tonight with a grain of salt, because you may find something that works better for you and for your region and for your school. These are just some of the things that I have learned that have benefited everyone in the chamber and has made Congress Online a very easy experience. So first of all, we're going to talk about chamber decorum. The most important thing is naming conventions. A lot of tournaments will have different naming conventions about how to properly name yourself in the Zoom or whatever platform they are using. For Congress, it usually goes along the line of something with Representative and you'll just put your last name. So you'll see like Representative Balderas just has Representative Balderas and not Representative Nathan Balderas. That's for if you have like a long last name, we're able to see the entirety. But you should also check because sometimes they'll have you put your school or your code. So that's always something to check and to make sure that your name is properly formatted when you first enter the Zoom room. We talked about this earlier, but when you enter the Zoom room, turn your camera on, be friendly, greet people when you're caucusing, say hi, how are you doing? And then once the chamber starts, you should keep your camera on unless there are tech difficulties or if someone tells you otherwise, but you should always be muted unless you are giving a speech or are called on by the presiding officer, or if you are the presiding officer. And even then the presiding officer should keep their self muted during speeches, just for sake of like respect for the speaker, so that there's no background noises. Keep your cameras on. This allows judges to see that you're engaged in the discussion. I always tell my students, like, do head nods when you agree with something, look engaged, like don't like be looking down at your notes the entire time, like look up and make eye contact and like look intrigued, make not like silly faces, but faces that make it look like you're paying attention. Don't do what Harris is doing. Don't be on your phone. Don't be talking to someone in the background. Like try to tell like your family members or anyone else that lives with you that you were competing at what time. Like my roommate knows that I'm working right now, so she's not going to come in my room and just start having a conversation with me. So that's something you should also be mindful of. Also be mindful of like your background and your surrounding. You don't want like too much background distraction because it could distract the judges from what you're talking about. Try to keep it simple. Also, yeah, lighting. Harris is back there flickering lights. Lighting, you want to make sure that you have like some sort of like presentation lighting. I would say that my lighting in my room is like not the best. That's also because I refuse to turn my overhead light on though. But try to have like decent lighting where it's not like you and then like a black background and it's just like a light on your face.
The light needs to be in front of you, not behind you.
That is true.
If the light's behind you, people are going to just see that bright bulb and they're going to fixate on that. You want the light on front of you, shining face. It's cool. You can be in a room that's dark behind you as long as you have a light right here.
Like, I bet none of y'all know that my lights are actually off in my room and I have a lamp right behind my laptop. Like a desk lamp that's just turned on, that I turn on. Before the tournament, you saw a few people do this, but create a placard that says representative and last name, and then maybe even like in like small font underneath it, put your school or whatever. I have at the end of the slide the link as to where to get the placard, what's it called? Template. So you can just like create your own and print it, and then you'll like, this is a bad example, like just like you'll fold it in half. It'll be something bigger than this. It'll be like a paper folded hot dog style. And then when you raise your placard, Harris is laughing at me because I'm using like kindergarten terms. And then when you do want to give a speech or ask questions, don't be shy and hold your placard like back here, like barely in the picture, like in the frame like this. Like, yeah, what Harris is doing, you want it like put it in front of your face if you have to. Put it in the camera. Put it up there. If you're having tech difficulties, don't hesitate to alert your presiding officer. If you can't get a hold of them, someone in your chamber, like hopefully you'll have someone else from your school in the chamber. If not, like get the email or like a phone number, make a friend, or social media or whatever, a way that you can get a hold of someone, like a text or an email, to just let them know. You always let your coach know as well if you get like kicked out of a meeting or if your internet goes out, or there's people talking in the chat. I can't see the chat here, so
don't worry about it. It
okay.
was me. Ignore me.
Okay, cool. But always like let someone know. That's the most important thing. If like I'm sitting here talking and I'm starting to glitch out because my Wi-Fi is going bad because I have terrible community Wi-Fi, just type in the chat. Like with Representative Mansour could not tell that they were starting to get glitchy. I paused them. I'll go over with that with presiding next. But those are all things that you should do as like chamber decorum and things that kind of help the chamber run more effectively. Next, I'm going to talk about presiding because I think the presiding officers play a big, crucial part in online debate and they have the most responsibility. And I don't want to discourage anyone from being a presiding officer, but it's tough. Like it's tough because there's like 4 different things you have to juggle while listening to the speech, while looking at the timer, while typing and changing the sheets, and still taking notes as well. So it's a lot to handle, but if you are an effective presiding officer, that's something that a lot of judges look upon as like you're taking a big leadership role in the chamber and they'll definitely give you better points for it. I know I personally, if a presiding officer does a really good job and keeps the chamber effective, I usually rank them 1 or 2. Like I have no shame of ranking presiding officers. So if y'all ever have me in the back of the room, don't ever be shy about being presiding officer. Because you'll probably get ranked on my ballot. Because I think being presiding officers are cool. Halverson talked about this earlier, but elections should take place on www.strawpoll.me. It's anonymous. It's effective. you just post the link in the chat. Google Sheets is your best friend. Create and share a Google Sheet with the members of your chamber. I did kind of a lazy version. I'm going to stop the share and show you a better version of one really fast. Where's it at?
And we'll make a copy of this a blank sheet of this and share it with all of the coaches so that you have one that you can share with your team and use as a starting point.
Okay, so this is the sheet. This is a better version of a Google Sheet that POs use. You see here, this is an example of one. I don't even know who found it.
Make it bigger.
Can I?
Control plus. Yeah.
There we go. Is that better?
Yep.
Okay. So you see here, they have their name, where they go to school, their code, who they're representing. They have their time signals over here. So you can tell like at what point, and I'll go over cards in a second, at what you should be looking for when you're giving a speech and how that timing goes. The randomization links, this has a link to like a way to like randomize speaking order, how to send in amendments, other important things, a table of parliamentary motions, so like how to properly make a motions, what vote is required. Then there's another tab and it has the preset recency screenshot. So this is like the recency, the like preset recency of like a lot of tournaments now online due to like glitching is doing a preset recency for speaking. And so it's posted here. Next is the like speech recency, and this is way more complex than what mine looked like. But if you looked at my Google Sheet, it had the just basic last name of someone, but this has like the speech or the like name, or that's the recency, speech one, decide how long it was. And then the same thing, it goes for questions. And then this was my favorite part about it, and I am looking for it a lot, but it has the internet emergency procedures that they'll use. So it has like what happens if someone disconnects in the middle of the speech and like what you should do. And it has, they put their phone number. Don't be rude and call this person. But you can put like your email there, or if you feel comfortable with the people in the chamber, you can put your phone number there. And then it just gives examples of a lot of the different things, of anything that could possibly happen tech-wise. So like if a judge disconnects, I as a judge, what should I do? This is what my PO wants me to do. And as the PO, you should be leading the chamber. And so honestly, if a PO sent this out to me and followed it really good, I probably would rank them one in my book, because this is showing them that they're taking initiative.
It also is something that the judges might ask for access to, because it makes judging very easy, because afterwards they get to go back and look very easily to see how active you were in the chamber, not just in terms of how many times you spoke, but how involved in questioning you were, who was consistently active in the chamber. And all of the ballots that you're going to see for the national organizations and their national championships are going to include references to like involvement in the chamber and active participation in the chamber as one of the things that judges should look at. So
those are all very true things. I know when I judge, and I feel like this is getting more true for judges, that judges don't just look for quantity of speeches, but rather quality of speeches, and activeness in the chamber. Because you could give someone could give 4 mediocre speeches, but I might give someone a 1 who gives 3 really good speeches, but is also active in the chamber and asking questions. And when I look at my Zoom screen, I can tell that they are taking notes and looking up and giving verbal cues, that they are paying attention and engaged in the debate, not just in a speaking manner. Google Sheets is your best friend. For timing speeches, I highly recommend creating the cards. I think these are lazy version of the cards. I actually like it better as a judge when they are different color cards. So like the 60 seconds could be blue, but the 30 seconds is green. And then the time is like red or whatever you want. That way it's like a color. So that way, if you do just catch a glance of it, like green means 60, blue means 30, red means my time is up and I should probably start ending. The chat feature is very helpful for presiding officers. As I was doing, I was recognizing the upcoming questioners, acknowledging points of privilege. You can also, if you notice people having tech difficulties, you could type in and be like, hey, Representative Benson, you are glitching out. And I can then recognize. And that way it's not thing. I have used the Zoom reactions for voting. Apparently that's not very good because Zoom reactions go away after a while. But you know, that's something you can play around with about how to do voting. There are some different like apps you can use. I'll share this document, but over here I just have the like Google Doc link of that presiding officer sheet I just showed you, the placard template, and then the elections link. This is all the really kind of big things that I noticed about online debate that are different. But yeah, if y'all have any questions.
And Kayla, will you throw a copy of that? We'll have Andrew will add it to that Google Dropbox, but if you'll put a copy of this in the chat, a file in the chat, and then we'll have it available for everybody afterwards.
Mike, I made an Excel version that's in the that's in the Dropbox. I will put a copy of that in the chat right now.
Okay, and I just put the link to my quick little PowerPoint in the chat. But yeah, are there any questions? Don't be shy.
All right.
Time to get your questions out instead of mid-chamber.
If you don't have questions, you are free to get out of here. If you're just waiting because you're uncomfortable in a group of 45 people, that's fine. Stick around. I'm sure that we'll be in here for a little bit. Thank you all. Coaches, if you want to hang around and chat, more than welcome to do that. Yeah, thank you all. Thank you. George, did you have any last minutes?
Nothing so far. Kayla summed it up really well. I'll reach out to you, Andrew, and Kayla in the next couple of days to discuss follow-up sessions. So
yeah, for sure.
Really well. So yeah, I've got no shortage of time, so I can't wait to work with y'all.
Yeah, this is gonna be fun. You're welcome. You're welcome, Katie. You're welcome, Mason. I hope everybody got something out of this. I'm gonna turn off the recording.